Okay, hi friends. So today we're going to be looking at how the international community responds to genocide. So a few things to keep in mind. One, the Armenian genocide that we learned about last week was not necessarily called a genocide. Even if you can say that it fits the definition of genocide, according to the definition that the UN created, the UN was not in existence during World War One. Okay, so the UN was not created until 1948, which, if you guys recall learning about the Holocaust or learning a little bit about World War II, it was after World War II that the Genocide Convention was written and signed and the UN was created. So the idea was when they created the UN, they wanted to create an organization made up of all of the countries of the world such that they could come together and collaborate and be allied and to be able to stop any atrocities like World War II from happening again. Okay, well, since 1948, we now have a legal definition for genocide. Okay, as you know, it has to have intent, it has to have specific groups, and there have to be specific actions that would fit under the criteria of genocide. Okay, so let's say an event happens post World War II after the Genocide Convention has been signed and created, and no one does anything to stop it. Okay, so the wondering that I would have is why? Because the idea is this is a legal document signed by all of these countries of the world, and the UN is supposed to be enforcing it. Okay, but why doesn't it work? Why does genocide continue to happen? So today what we're going to do is take a look at some of those systemic reasons why genocide continues, and we're going to look at some options for responding. Many of these options have been used in examples, and so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So as we think about different options for responding to a genocide, some things to consider are how expensive would it be for a country to stop a genocide? Okay, and you can look at expenses in two different ways. Obviously, they would have to spend money. So, like, let's say there's a genocide happening in the Middle East, okay, and a country is actually trying to eliminate a group within its own borders. What would it cost the United States, the EU, the UK, neighboring countries like Turkey, who's supposed to be our ally, to come together and do something that would stop it? Would it mean spending money on weapons? Would it mean spending money on troops? And then also, like, lives lost. Would we lose lives going in and trying to run up against a genocidal perpetrator? Maybe it's the government that's doing it. Maybe it's just one tribe that's doing it, or one political party that's trying to eliminate another group. So we have to look at that in terms of economics, cost and impact. So how much is it going to cost us, and how likely is it going to actually stop a genocide? Because if it's not likely to stop it, why are we investing our money and our lives and our troops? So that's a question that countries will have. Also, how quickly can we make it stop? Is it going to involve the United States coming in and other countries coming in and a long, drawn out military operation that may cost us money in the long term, may cost us lives in the long term? And then how likely is the option actually going to help the people who are targeted, who are being identified as going to be killed in a genocide? And how much would our involvement actually maybe make it worse? Okay, so these are some of the questions that we would ask as a country. These are some of the questions other countries ask before they get involved and try to stop a genocide. Okay, so now let's look at some of the options that you can take to stop a genocide. Okay, the first option, of course, would be the use of military force. So countries can come together, obviously, agree to send in troops or send in weapons or use targeted strategic attacks. So using drones, using targeted specific military bombs. So what places would we want to bomb in order to specifically stop the genocide from happening? So to stop the government from continuing what it's doing. So you have to ask what would be the advantages of this and what would be the disadvantages. So two situations when this actually did happen and it did stop the genocide was during World War II, when the Nazis were trying to eliminate multiple groups, specifically the Jews in Europe, and gypsies and homosexuals and anyone who was in a different group, so like Russians. So there was that genocide was literally stopped by the allies of World War II through military force. A second one, which we're going to be learning about next week, is the Bosnian genocide, which happened in the 1990s. And the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is the United States and some other European nations from the northern hemisphere, agreed to create a military alliance to target, and they did targeted strikes in Bosnia against the Serbian government that was trying to eliminate the Muslim minority there. And the strikes actually worked and stopped the government from continuing to kill these people and from continuing the genocide. So advantages, it's fast, it works. Sometimes it may be longer depending on how embroiled the situation is. Disadvantages, expensive and dangerous, and lives lost. So getting involved, you would really and truly have to believe that this has to be stopped. Otherwise, you might be losing lives within your own country, which kind of is counter to your national interest. Okay, a second option would be to use peacekeeping troops. Now, peacekeepers are donated soldiers that member countries donate to do something for the UN. So you can see in this image that the soldiers you see are wearing blue hats. The blue hat is a symbol that you are a UN peacekeeper. And maybe you're a soldier from like France, or maybe you're a soldier from Libya, or maybe you're a soldier from the United States. But wearing that blue helmet and serving as a peacekeeper, your country has donated you essentially to go on a peacekeeping mission for the United States. Now, peacekeepers are only lightly armed. They are directed not to use force. Their job is essentially to help diplomacy. So they can go in and they can like enforce an election, or they can go and enforce a negotiation between the government and the group that's being targeted, and be there kind of as security. But really, they're not supposed to go in and like kill people or like physically, militarily stop the government or take the government down. They're there to be neutral, but to provide security, which is why they're called peacekeeping troops. So the advantages of this response are that it's diplomatic, meaning that you are getting sides to talk as opposed to encouraging fighting. So you're kind of like a mall security guard to kind of provide a metaphor. But the disadvantages are kind of the same. Like you can't really use force. So you're helpless if violence does break out. So let's say the government wants to continue to round people up and like shoot them in front of people. You as a UN peacekeeper, your job is to like essentially talk to them and try to get them to stop. But you're not really supposed to physically stop them from doing what they were doing. So that would be the disadvantage. Another option is providing humanitarian aid. So you're going in, and a lot of times there's organizations as part of the UN that will do this. So the United Nations will send in groups to actually provide food, supplies, refugee camps. So when we learned about immigration and we learned about refugee camps, often those are set up by the UN and some of the organizations within the UN. So essentially taking care of refugees. Advantages are you're actually helping the people who are being targeted and keeping them safe. Disadvantages, you're not really stopping the genocide. You're just trying to help people and save them. Okay, option number 4. Sanctions is a word we use as a way to have punishment. So it's like it's a way to influence other countries to do what you want without actually using force. So one specific way to use sanctions with a country is economic sanctions, and we've done this a lot over the last 50 years. We do it with countries like Iran. We do it with North Korea, essentially cutting off economic trade or economic aid. So by refusing to trade with the offending country, you're punishing their GDP. You're making it so that they cannot continue to develop and they have poverty. So it's kind of a threat in that way. And there are many countries who get very upset when that happens, and it could then be influenced to stop committing genocide against a group of people in their own country. So an example where this actually worked was in Sudan, where the United States was able to freeze its financial assets of the Sudanese government and make it so that like they couldn't pay anyone and they couldn't trade and they were basically going broke. So it caused them to kind of to step down and stop doing what they were doing. So the advantages are no violence. You're not spending money on your military. Disadvantages are sometimes it doesn't work. Okay, so condemnation. This is a word we use for basically just making a forceful public statement against the actions of the offending government. So coming out live and going on Twitter and saying, I do not agree with what your country is doing and you should stop. Sometimes it also includes a threat. So you should stop killing people. This is genocide. If you don't stop, we're going to A, B, C, or D. Okay, sometimes when that worked was with Iraq, when our government spoke out against the genocide against the Kurds, and in Sudan, in the north of Sudan, in Darfur, where the government was killing people to get them out of their region, and it was an ethnic conflict. So that worked also. Advantages are sometimes if it's followed with a threat or if it brings the world kind of to like recognize that it's actually happening, it can be influential. The disadvantages is it's not a direct action. It's basically tweeting or making a speech. So it's kind of sometimes it's a threat and sometimes it's perceived as an empty threat. Okay, I added taking no action as an option because sometimes countries, including members of the United Nations, just don't do anything. They don't necessarily see that there's a national interest in getting involved. There have been a number of examples where no one does anything, no action is taken, and a genocide continues. Examples would be the Armenian genocide, obviously. There was the Ukrainian genocide, which happened in the 1930s, and it was a situation where the Soviet Union used starvation to eliminate a whole group of Ukrainian farmers in order to create collectivization and to create a pure communist nation. The Ukrainian farmers didn't want that, so instead of allowing them to kind of be their own country and have a different economic system, they just decided to starve them out. No one really did anything to stop that. So there was a refugee crisis. There were millions of people that were killed. And still, the Ukraine, even though it's now an independent state, there's still a lot of conflict there. The Cambodian genocide, which also happened, it happened during the 1970s and had to do with communism. The government wanted the nation to be communist and essentially rounded up anybody who was not willing to be a peasant farmer. And then the Rwandan genocide, which happened in the 1990s, and it was a country in the middle of Africa that no one saw any national interest with. So countries did not get involved, and basically 1 million people were killed in Rwanda because of ethnic hatred, and no one stopped it. That one we're going to explore next week. So the advantages of taking no action, let's talk about that. Well, you don't lose any of your own people. It could mean like politically as a government, your people continue to vote for you because they don't want you to get involved in something scary that's happening in the world. So you're not sending your troops over in the line of fire or putting them in danger. Disadvantages, the genocide continues and you can have millions of people that are killed as a result of an evil group that or an evil government that just wants to use elimination of a group of people as a means to getting their political ends. So, as we think about all of these options, I would like you, we're going to start exploring the Rwandan genocide, and I would like you to think about these as potential options, what options were actually taken, and where we could have been involved, maybe where the genocide could have been stopped. So, thank you for listening to this presentation. I know this topic is really intense. If you have any concerns or questions, or you start to get a little stressed out learning about this, just hit me up and let me know. I'm totally here to like make sure that you guys feel supported because this is a really tricky topic.